The air hung thick and heavy, pressing against the windows of the lakehouse as crickets screamed in the dark. Maggie wiped sweat from her neck, watching the steam rise from the etouffee she'd been stirring since sunset. The table was set, linen napkins folded perfectly, wine already breathing, candles flickering in the humid air. She wanted tonight to feel like home again. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from. It helps us know how far these stories reach. Paul came in first, sleeves rolled, smelling of sawdust and bourbon. "Smells good," he said, kissing her cheek absently before reaching for the bottle. Luke arrived moments later, a little late as always, barefoot on the porch, shirt damp with summer air. Maggie smiled anyway. "You remember to bring the pie?" He lifted a white box, fresh from Denise's bakery. "Perfect," she said. "Sit, both of you." They gathered at the table, the hum of cicadas blending with the low creak of the fan. Maggie poured wine, her voice light. "Feels like it's been forever since we did this." Paul nodded, distracted. "Been working late? You know how it gets." Luke grinned. "That new project by the river?" "Yeah. City wants it finished before fall." Their talk stayed shallow. Work, weather, the neighbor's barking dog. But something pulsed beneath every word, a rhythm Maggie couldn't place. Paul's laughter came slower, softer. Luke's eyes avoided hers too often. She told herself it was nothing. Brothers-in-law sometimes had strange tension. Maybe money, maybe pride. She served the etouffee, letting the heat fog her face. "Careful, it's spicy." Paul tasted it first. "You outdid yourself again, Mag." "Always does," Luke added quietly. Their voices overlapped, too warm, too rehearsed. Maggie smiled anyway, eyes flicking between them. Halfway through dinner, Luke's phone buzzed. He silenced it instantly, sliding it under the napkin. Paul's fork paused mid-air. Maggie caught that tiny moment, a look exchanged gone too fast to name. Her chest tightened. "You all right?" she asked. Paul forced a chuckle. "Yeah, just tired." Luke raised his glass. "To family," he said. Maggie clinked glasses. "To family." Paul's voice came last, quieter. "To us." They drank. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the lake. Maggie glanced through the window, dark water rippling, wind brushing the trees. For a moment she saw their reflections in the glass, three faces smiling, none touching. After dessert, Luke stood to leave. "Gotta drive back before the storm hits." "You can stay," Maggie offered. He shook his head. "Early morning tomorrow." Paul walked him out, the screen door slapping softly behind them. Their voices carried low through the humid dark. Maggie leaned by the window, trying not to listen, but every murmur felt sharpened by silence. When they finally returned, Luke avoided her eyes, saying only, "Thanks for dinner, sis." "Anytime." Paul locked the door behind him. "Long day," he said, brushing past her. She nodded, blowing out the candles one by one. As the last flame died, she caught Paul watching Luke through the window, his smile faint, private, lingering just a moment too long. The morning light slid through the curtains, cutting the lakehouse in quiet gold. Maggie sat alone at the table, sipping coffee gone cold. Paul had left early, said he needed to check the site before the rain came. The house felt emptier than usual, the air still carrying the scent of last night's candles and crawfish. She stacked the plates she hadn't washed, her movements slow, deliberate. Something in her chest felt unfinished, like a song missing its last note. She went to the bedroom to strip the sheets. Paul's shirt lay crumpled on the chair, smelling faintly of sweat and cologne. When she bent to pick it up, a small Polaroid slid out of the pocket, fluttering to the floor. She froze. The picture showed Paul and Luke at a bar, neon lights, Mardi Gras beads hanging behind them. Paul's arm was around Luke's shoulders, both grinning, flushed with drink. On the surface it looked harmless, just two men out late, but there was something in their faces too close, too soft. A warmth she'd never seen between them before. Her fingers trembled as she turned the photo over. No date, no note, just a faint smudge of fingerprint oil. She stared at it until her reflection blurred across the glossy surface. The phone rang, sharp and sudden. She jumped. It was Denise. "Morning, sugar. You sleep at all last night?" "Barely," Maggie said. "You sounded off yesterday. Everything all right with Paul?" Maggie hesitated. Fine, just tired. You sure? Yeah, she lied, eyes still fixed on the picture. After hanging up, she tucked the photo back into the drawer, then shut it too hard. The sound cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. She opened it again, slower this time. Inside, folded shirts, cufflinks, an old watch, and beneath them, another photo. This one of Luke alone, standing near Paul's truck. The same bar lights glowing behind him. Paul must have taken it. Her breath hitched. That evening, Paul came home later than usual, damp from rain, a half smile on his face. Traffic's hell when it storms, he said. Maggie stood at the counter, hands busy with the kettle. Where were you working today? Same spot, by the river. Luke helping again? Paul's pause was short but heavy. No, he's got his own jobs now. She nodded, watching steam rise between them. You two were close for a while. He laughed softly. Still are. Why? Just asking. He stepped closer, brushed her shoulder with his hand. You're acting strange, Mag. Am I? You tell me. She met his eyes, searching for guilt, for something. He kissed her cheek and walked off to shower. She stayed still, kettle whistling behind her, her pulse louder than the rain. When he left his wallet on the counter, she slipped the photo inside, pressing it flat between the bills. A silent test. If he noticed, if he reacted, she'd know. But the next morning, he took his wallet and left as if nothing had changed. The photo was gone when he came home that night. Rain pooled in the cracked sidewalks of the French Quarter, the air thick with perfume, beer, and secrets. Maggie walked beneath her umbrella, the same black one Paul had left in the truck. The sound of jazz leaked from the bars, brass horns, laughter, a rhythm that mocked her heartbeat. She'd told Paul she was visiting Denise in town. Instead, she followed her instincts, that cold whisper that said, he's lying again. Denise's salon sat 2 blocks off Bourbon Street. Maggie pushed open the door, the bell tinkling. Denise looked up from a client's hair, smirking. Girl, you look like sin and suspicion. Maggie forced a smile. You seen Paul or Luke around here lately? Denise raised a brow. You asking as a sister or a wife? Both. Denise snipped a lock of hair, her tone casual but sharp. Saw them 2 weeks ago. At LaRue's. Just the 2 of them. Thought it was odd. No work talk. No buddies. Looked like they didn't want to be seen. Maggie's grip tightened around her purse. LaRue's? By the river. The one with the red balcony. You can't miss it. Outside, the sky broke open. She walked fast, heart hammering. The photo had been real then. She hadn't imagined it. Her shoes slapped against wet pavement, guiding her toward LaRue's glowing sign. A gold fleur-de-lis above a narrow doorway. Inside, the bar was dim, music humming low from an old record player. She sat at the counter, ordered a bourbon she didn't touch. Her eyes drifted to the back corner, where a man in a leather jacket lit a cigarette. The air smelled like smoke and cologne, the kind Paul wore. She looked down the hallway, lined with framed photos, Mardi Gras parades, couples laughing under beads and moonlight. Her gaze snagged on one image, Paul and Luke again, arms around each other, mid-laughter. It was pinned to the wall among strangers, like some forgotten memory. Her breath left her in a sharp exhale. Ma'am? The bartender asked. You all right? She blinked hard. Yeah, just never mind. She left the glass untouched, stepped outside, and leaned against the wall, the rain mixing with sweat on her face. Across the street, a shadow moved. 2 men under a shared umbrella. Paul's walk was unmistakable, steady, confident. Luke beside him, head bowed, too close. Maggie's pulse stuttered. She stepped back into the alley's cover, watching them stop beneath a balcony's light. Luke said something, his hands trembling slightly. Paul smiled, soft, private, and touched his arm. For one suspended second, the world went silent. Only the rain. And that touch. Then headlights cut through the street, and they pulled apart instantly, faces turning away like boys caught stealing. Maggie's hand clamped over her mouth, holding back a sound that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite rage. Paul glanced once more down the road. Scanning, She ducked behind the brick wall, breath shallow. When she looked again, they were gone. The rain fell harder now, drowning her thoughts. She clutched the umbrella, her knuckles white, whispering to herself, "It's not what it looks like. It can't be." But deep down she already knew. Some betrayals don't need words. Sunday morning came with sunlight that felt too bright, too holy for the weight in her chest. The church bell echoed through Cypress Hollow, summoning every family within earshot. Maggie dressed slow, buttoning her pale blue dress, the one Paul had once said made her look like mercy itself. He stood by the door, tie slightly crooked, Bible under his arm. Luke had texted earlier, not coming today. Paul hadn't mentioned it. Just slipped the phone back in his pocket, unreadable. The drive to St. Augustine's was quiet. Paul hummed softly to the radio, tapping the wheel, pretending the air wasn't heavy. Maggie stared out the window, the endless fields shining wet from the rain. When the church appeared, white paint peeling, cross-glinting in the heat, she felt her pulse quicken. Inside, fans whirred lazily. People smiled, whispered greetings. Denise waved from the back pew, her eyes sharp even under the gentlest light. Maggie sat beside Paul, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. Father Renew stepped to the pulpit, his voice deep and slow. "Today's message," he began, "is about sin that hides in plain sight. The kind that lives among us, smiling, holding hands, pretending to be love." Maggie's throat went dry. Paul shifted beside her. The priest's words rolled on, heavy as thunder. "Temptation doesn't always wear a serpent's face. Sometimes it looks familiar. Sometimes it calls you brother." A whisper rippled through the pews. Maggie stared at the wooden floorboards, her jaw tight. Paul leaned close, whispering, "You okay?" "Fine," she said, her voice too quick. "You sure?" She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just thinking," Father Renaud continued. "The devil doesn't destroy homes through strangers. He does it through comfort, through secrets, through hearts that want what they shouldn't." The choir hummed a soft hymn, voices trembling like confession. Maggie watched the stained glass light spill across Paul's hands. He didn't look up at the priest, didn't sing, didn't even move. When the service ended, people rose, talking quietly. Maggie turned to Paul. "He really laid it on thick today." Paul shrugged. "He always does. You know how Renaud is about sin and family." She studied him, searching for even a flicker of guilt. Maybe he's right. He looked at her finally, expression calm but eyes tired. "About what?" "That some things can't hide forever." He hesitated, then reached for her hand. "Whatever's on your mind, you can tell me." Her lips parted, then closed again. "It's nothing." Outside, sunlight beat down on the gravel lot. People hugged, laughed, promised to see each other Wednesday. Paul helped an elderly woman to her car, all warmth and courtesy, while Maggie watched, feeling like glass cracking under pressure. On the ride home, neither spoke. The sermon echoed in her skull, "Temptation that calls you brother." When they reached the lakehouse, Paul went straight to the shed to fix a loose shutter. Maggie stayed by the porch, staring at the oleander bushes swaying in the wind, their pale flowers bright as warning signs. That night, the storm returned, sweeping across the lake with a low moan that rattled the windows. Maggie couldn't sleep. The sermon's words circled her mind, "Temptation that calls you brother." Paul slept beside her, slow breaths steady, peaceful in a way that made her skin crawl. She rose quietly, slipped on her robe, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. The clock read 2:47 a.m. She made tea, the kettle's whistle soft under the thunder. She sat at the table and opened her laptop. The glow washed her face pale. In the search bar she typed, "How to make someone sick without trace." Dozens of results bloomed. Some were medical, others dark, hidden in corners of the web where no decent soul should wander. She scrolled past the warnings, the disclaimers, until one headline caught her eye: "Creole Remedies and the Art of Natural Poison." Her fingers hovered. Then she clicked. An old scanned page appeared, its edges yellowed, written in Louisiana French and English. It spoke of sweet death, a blend made from roots and flowers once used to punish betrayal. Oleander, belladonna, nightshade, harmless if touched, deadly if brewed. Maggie read every word, lips moving silently. The writer had called it the widow's kiss. Paul shifted in the bedroom. She froze, listening. When silence returned, she bookmarked the page, then whispered to herself, "Just curiosity." But curiosity had a pulse now. By morning she was dressed early, hair pinned, lipstick faint. She told Paul she was heading into town for gardening supplies. He didn't question it, only asked her to pick up gas for the mower. His trust cut deeper than accusation. The garden centre smelled of soil and wet leaves. Maggie ran her hand along the seedlings, her nails grazing green stems. Oleander caught her eye, delicate, almost pretty pink flowers like painted lips. The clerk smiled. "You sure you want those, ma'am?" "Pretty, but poisonous." She smiled back, soft and sure. "They're perfect." She loaded them into the trunk. The rain starting again, soft as applause. On the drive home she passed the church. The cross stood crooked against the grey sky, its shadow slicing the road. At the lakehouse she planted the oleanders along the porch rail, digging carefully into the damp earth. The air filled with their bittersweet scent. She whispered to herself with each motion. Nothing wrong with flowers, nothing at all. When Paul came home she was still outside, mud on her knees. He kissed her forehead, smiling. "They look beautiful. Haven't seen you this happy in a while. Guess I just needed something new to take care of," she said. That night, as lightning flashed over the lake, she sat by the window, staring at the row of blossoms glowing faintly in the rain. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet part of her had already crossed the line. She thought of Luke's face, Paul's smile, and the look they shared beneath that streetlight. Her hand tightened around the teacup. The garden swayed in the storm, alive with secrets. The lake shimmered beneath a cloudless sky that afternoon, sunlight glinting off the water like scattered glass. Maggie spent the day preparing polishing silver chilling wine, frosting the cake Denise had dropped off with a wink. Paul's birthday always drew a crowd, but this year felt heavier, quieter. She wanted perfection. Every detail in place, every glass filled, every smile convincing. By 6 the house buzzed with voices. Paul laughed too loudly, greeting his co-workers and neighbors. Luke arrived late, carrying a wrapped gift and a bottle of whiskey. Maggie's eyes caught on the tie he wore, navy silk small embroidered anchors, the same one Paul had bought last Christmas. "Sorry I'm late," Luke said, cheeks flushed. "Traffic?" Maggie asked. "Yeah, something like that." Paul clapped him on the shoulder. "Wouldn't start without you." Maggie poured drinks, her smile tight, but practiced. The air smelled of roasted chicken and lemon pie, the room bright with chatter. Yet underneath it she felt the hum again, the one that made her chest ache. Luke and Paul stayed close, moving in an invisible orbit that excluded her, small glances and half-smiles passing like static. When everyone gathered around the table she lit the candles. The golden flames reflected in Paul's eyes as he leaned forward, grinning. "Make a wish," someone said. He looked across the table, first at Luke, then at her. "Already did," he murmured, then blew them out. Applause. Laughter. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she sliced the cake. Later, after most guests had drifted onto the porch with drinks, Paul raised his glass. "To family," he said, voice thick with wine and charm. "And to the people who keep us sane." Luke smiled. "That includes me, I hope." Paul chuckled. "You most of all, little brother." The words twisted in Maggie's stomach. She forced a laugh. "Well then," she said, lifting her own glass, "to family may love never turn poisonous." Luke froze mid-sip. Paul glanced at her, startled, then smiled as if to smooth it over. "Hear, hear!" The group echoed him, oblivious. Only Luke's eyes darted toward her, uneasy. As the evening dimmed, music played low through the speakers. Couples danced, shoes scuffing the wooden floor. Maggie watched from the doorway, a spectator in her own home. Paul moved among the guests, easy and charming, touching shoulders, laughing, alive. When he finally reached her, he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You've outdone yourself," he said softly. "Feels like the old days." She smiled faintly. "Does it?" "Almost." Luke approached then, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. "Last round before I head out." Paul took one, handed the other to Maggie. "Just one more," he said. The 3 of them stood together, the laughter around them fading into a hum. The light caught Paul's tie pin, gold and shining. Maggie raised her glass, eyes steady. "Happy birthday," she said. Paul grinned, clinking hers. "To all of us." She drank, the taste of whiskey burning clean, but her thoughts already drifting toward the row of oleanders outside, their petals trembling in the wind. The storm rolled in just past midnight, sudden and loud, rain lashing against the lakehouse windows. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, still in her dress from the party, the dishes piled in the sink. The laughter from earlier had faded into silence. Paul had gone to bed hours ago, leaving his phone face down on the nightstand. She traced circles on her wine glass, her mind looping through every look, every whisper between him and Luke. Each memory stung sharper under the sound of thunder. Then came the knock, 3 short raps at the front door. She froze. When she opened it, Luke stood drenched on the porch, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes glassy with drink. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking before she could even speak. "Luke, it's past midnight. I can't do this anymore." She stepped aside. "Come inside before someone sees you." He entered, dripping rain onto the wooden floor. His hands shook as he reached for his jacket pocket, then stopped, unable to speak. Maggie poured him a drink, her voice low. "What happened?" He stared at the glass. "You already know." "Say it," she whispered. He hesitated, tears swelling in his eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not with him. Not this way. The clock ticked louder. Maggie's breath hitched. "How long?" "A year," he said, his voice barely audible. "Since the summer he helped me move back here." Her body went still, every sound in the room vanishing beneath that single word. Luke gripped his head, trembling. "I didn't mean for it to be this," he said. He was confused, that it was just comfort at first. But then, "Stop," her voice cracked. "You think I want to hear this?" He looked up at her, desperate. "I wanted to end it. I swear." But he said he couldn't. A hand slapped the table. "Couldn't what, Luke? Choose between us?" His silence was the answer. Outside, lightning flashed, white and violent. Maggie stood, pacing. "You're my brother," she said, each word trembling with disbelief. "My husband and my brother." Luke's tears spilled. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I didn't want this. I thought if I told you, maybe you could forgive me." She laughed bitterly. "Forgive? You've both been lying under my roof, eating my food, smiling at my table." He reached for her arm. "Please don't hate me." She pulled away. "I don't hate you, Luke. Not yet." He blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said softly, "I haven't decided what either of you deserve." He stared at her, breath unsteady. "You're scaring me." "You should be scared." Rain hammered the porch as he turned to leave, face pale. "You won't tell him?" She didn't answer, only watched as he disappeared into the storm, headlights flashing once before vanishing down the road. When the door shut, she stood there in the dark, the smell of wet earth and whiskey thick in the air. Upstairs, Paul stirred in bed, unaware. Maggie whispered to herself, voice shaking but certain. "No, Luke, I won't tell him." She poured the remaining whiskey down the sink, then opened the window wide, letting the rain wash the air clean. Somewhere, in the night, a decision hardened inside her. Morning came grey and heavy, the air still tasting of rain. Maggie stood barefoot in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, hair pulled back as though she were preparing any ordinary breakfast. But the counter told another story. Jars, herbs, bottles, pages torn from the old Creole remedies she'd printed the night before. The laptop sat open beside the kettle, the title glowing faintly, The Widow's Kiss. Paul wandered in, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You're up early," he said, voice soft, couldn't sleep. He kissed her shoulder, lingering just long enough to sting. "You worry too much." She smiled without looking at him. "Maybe." He left for work soon after, and the house exhaled into silence. Maggie washed her hands, then reached for the small basket of oleander leaves she'd plucked before dawn. Their pale pink edges trembled as if alive. She laid them on a towel, each movement calm, precise. The instructions were simple. Crush the leaves, boil them slowly, strain and sweeten. Her hands moved like prayer. The scent that rose from the pot was strange, sweet at first, then metallic, almost bitter enough to make her eyes water. She stirred until the color deepened, the steam curling against her face. Every bubble felt like punctuation, marking a step she couldn't undo. A car passed outside, and she flinched, half expecting Luke. But it was only the mailman, the world continuing as if nothing had fractured. When the mixture cooled, she poured it into a mason jar. The liquid gleamed amber, innocent. She screwed the lid tight and wrapped a piece of paper around it, scribbling the word honey. The phone rang. Denise again. "Hey, sugar. You sound tired," Denise said. "Everything all right over there?" "Fine," Maggie replied, steady as glass. "Paul's birthday go smooth?" "Better than expected." "That man's lucky to have you." Maggie's lips curved faintly. "He sure is." She hung up and stared at the jar on the counter. The label stared back. Simple, harmless, perfect. By noon, she'd cleaned the kitchen spotless. No trace of leaves, no scent of metal, only the faint perfume of oleander drifting in from the porch. When Paul returned that evening, the house smelled of stew and candle wax. "You're spoiling me lately," he said, smiling as he loosened his tie. "Maybe I'm trying to make up for lost time." He kissed her cheek. "Don't change a thing." She watched him pour himself tea, her heart calm, her pulse steady. He glanced at the jar of honey, opened it, sniffed. "New?" "Picked it up in town," she said lightly. "Try it in your tea, it's sweet." He stirred a spoonful in, the steam rising between them. "You sure you don't want any?" She smiled. "Not tonight." As he took the first sip, she turned away, stepping to the window. The lake shimmered gold in the dying light. Somewhere in the garden, the oleander leaves fluttered gently, as if applauding. Paul came home later than usual that week, his shoulders tight, skin pale under the porch light. Maggie met him at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rough day?" "Long," he muttered, kicking off his boots. "Got a headache that won't quit." "Sit," she said softly. "I'll make you something warm." He didn't argue. He never did, when she used that tone. She brewed tea, a careful mix of honey, lemon, and what now lived quietly inside it. When she set the cup in front of him, he smiled faintly, grateful. "You're a lifesaver, Mag." "Drink it before it cools," she replied. He did. She watched the muscles in his throat move as he swallowed, each sip a secret swallowed whole. For a few minutes silence hung between them, broken only by the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. Then he sighed, leaning back. "Guess I've been burning the candle too long." "Maybe," she said, turning toward the sink. "You never did know when to stop." That night he fell asleep quickly, body heavy, breathing uneven. Maggie lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. Her heartbeat was steady, almost too steady. The air smelled faintly of soap and the faint sweetness of honey. By morning he was sweating. "Probably the flu," he said, waving off her concern. But his skin had a strange grey tint, his eyes dull like wet stone. She spooned broth into a bowl, her voice tender. "You'll feel better soon." He nodded, smiling weakly. "What would I do without you?" She brushed his hair back. "You'll never have to find out." When he finally drifted to sleep again, she sat in the chair by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. Outside, the oleander bushes swayed gently in the wind, their blossoms bright against the storm. Luke hadn't called in days. She wasn't sure if she wanted him to. Every ring of the phone made her stomach twist. If he spoke, she might forgive him, and forgiveness would ruin everything. By the third day, Paul tried to return to work, but barely made it to the truck before collapsing against the seat. She ran to him, feigning panic. "Paul! Paul! What's wrong?" He groaned, clutching his stomach. "God, it's like my insides are burning." She drove him to urgent care, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The doctor said food poisoning, maybe shellfish. Maggie nodded, eyes wide and wet. "We had leftovers from the party," she whispered. Paul laughed weakly through the nausea. "Guess I shouldn't have trusted your cooking this time." Guess not, she said, her smile trembling at the edges. Back home, she made more tea, carefully, lovingly, and set it by his bed. Just rest, she murmured. Everything will be all right. When he closed his eyes, she touched his hand gently. His skin felt cold, his pulse faint beneath her fingers. She didn't cry. Not yet. That night she lay awake beside him, the sound of rain blending with his shallow breathing. Each sigh, each shiver, felt like a quiet confession answered. And when dawn broke over the lake, she whispered into the grey light, "That's it, my love, just let it work." The morning smelled of bleach and fear. Maggie had spent an hour cleaning the bathroom floor where Paul had been sick, scrubbing until her wrists ached. He sat on the edge of the bed, pale and sweating, clutching his stomach. "I'll be fine," he said weakly. "Just bad shrimp." "You haven't eaten shrimp in days," she replied, wringing out the cloth. He tried to smile. "You sound like my mother." Maybe she was smarter than I gave her credit for. When he stood, his knees buckled. She caught him before he hit the floor. "That's it," she said firmly. "You're seeing a doctor." He protested on the way there, but she didn't listen. The drive was quiet, the road gleaming from last night's rain. She kept her eyes straight ahead, knuckles tight on the wheel. Every bump made him groan. Dr. Laramie's office smelled of coffee and disinfectant. The man himself was kind, middle-aged, the kind who smiled too much. "Likely food poisoning," he said after a brief exam. "Nothing alarming. We'll run tests to be sure." Paul nodded weakly. "See? Told you." Maggie forced a smile. "You did." The doctor prescribed rest, hydration, and something for the nausea. As they left, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's lucky to have you. You caught it early." She met his eyes. "I always do." Back home, Paul went straight to bed. Maggie brought him soup, setting it gently on the tray. He tried a spoonful and grimaced. "No flavor." "You're sick," she said. "Everything tastes dull when you're sick." He sighed. "Luke called earlier, said he might stop by tomorrow." Her spoon paused mid-air. "You did?" "Yeah, wants to check on me." She smiled faintly. How thoughtful. That night she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the reflection of the moon ripple on the lake. The air buzzed with frogs and cicadas, too alive for her stillness. Inside, Paul coughed softly in his sleep. When Luke arrived the next afternoon, he looked haunted, dark circles, trembling hands. He carried a container of soup, his voice thin. "He's really sick, isn't he?" Maggie nodded, eyes unreadable. "Doctor says food poisoning. You can take it up with the shrimp." Luke frowned. "Don't joke about it." "Who's joking?" He walked past her, into the room. Paul opened his eyes, smiled faintly. "Didn't expect to see you." "Had to," Luke murmured. "You look rough." Paul laughed softly. "Guess that's what happens when you try to die on your birthday week." Maggie stood in the doorway, watching them. Luke's hand lingered on Paul's shoulder a second too long. Her pulse throbbed in her temples. "Want some tea?" she asked, voice calm. Luke turned. "Sure." In the kitchen, she poured him a cup, steady hands betraying no emotion. No poison this time. Not for him. Not yet. When she brought it to him, he smiled awkwardly. "Thanks. You should stay away for a while," she said quietly, setting the cup down. Luke blinked. "What?" "You being here won't help him. Or you." His confusion softened into guilt. "You know, don't you?" She didn't answer. Just looked at him long enough for silence to say everything. He left the tea untouched. The sky was pale when Maggie drove into town the next morning, a thin fog rolling over the bayou. She told Paul she needed groceries, but really she needed space, distance from the smell of medicine, sweat and slow decay that filled the lake house. Her phone buzzed halfway there. "Denise." "Girl, you're up early," Denise said, voice sharp with gossip. "You might want to hear this before you get to the store." Maggie sighed. "What now?" "I found something last night. You remember that old flip phone Luke used to carry? The one he said broke?" "Yeah." "We didn't. He sold me a box of junk for the thrift sale and that phone was in it. I charged it up. Guess what I found?" Maggie gripped the wheel tighter. "What?" "Messages, baby. Between him and Paul. All sweet talk and nicknames." Been going on for months. Maggie's chest hollowed. You're sure? Screenshots don't lie? You want me to send them? No, Maggie said, her voice quiet, steady. I believe you. Mags. You okay? I'm fine, Denise. Thank you. She ended the call before her friend could say more. For a moment she just sat there in the parked car outside the grocery store, her breath fogging the glass. Then she began to laugh, soft, dry, almost soundless, the kind of laugh that comes when something inside you breaks clean through. By the time she returned home, Paul was sitting on the porch, pale but smiling. You didn't have to run out, he said. I needed air. He reached for her hand. You've been my rock through this. Her smile was perfect. That's what I'm here for. That night after he fell asleep, she went to the kitchen. The jar of honey gleamed faintly under the lamp. She unscrewed the lid, the smell sweet and sharp, and stared into it as though it could answer her. The phone Denise mentioned lay on the counter. She'd stopped by her friend's place after all. The messages were still there, pet names, hotel addresses, confessions typed at midnight. She read each one carefully. No anger, no tears. Just a quiet, growing clarity. At the end of the thread, one final message from Paul. Don't worry, she'll never know. I promise. Maggie smiled, slow and tired. You kept your promise, love, almost. She carried the phone to the sink, turned on the faucet and dropped it in. The bubbles swallowed it whole, screen flickering before dying out. The next morning, Denise stopped by with biscuits and coffee. You holding up, sugar? Better than ever, Maggie said, eyes bright and unreadable. You sure? You look peaceful. Maggie laughed softly. Peace is all about perspective. When Denise left, Maggie went to the yard. The oleander bushes swayed in the morning breeze, their blossoms open, glowing faintly in the light. She picked one, twirled it between her fingers, and whispered, You and me, we're not done yet. Inside, Paul called her name weakly. She turned toward the sound, calm as the still lake behind her. The scream came at noon, a sharp, strangled sound from upstairs that sent Maggie's heart thudding once before settling into eerie calm. She climbed the steps slowly, the air thick with the smell of medicine and sweat. Paul lay on the floor beside the bed, his skin grey, lips trembling. Can't breathe, he rasped, clutching his chest. Maggie knelt beside him, her hands steady. You're all right, baby. Just stay with me. He looked up at her, eyes glassy, voice thin. Call someone. I will, she said softly, brushing his hair back. Just breathe. She dialed 911, her voice a perfect imitation of panic. My husband, he's collapsed. Please hurry. By the time the paramedics arrived, the lakehouse smelled of rain and fear. They lifted Paul onto the stretcher, asking questions she barely heard. She followed them out, barefoot, rain soaking her dress as sirens wailed through the pines. At Mercy General, fluorescent lights hummed above her head. The world felt unreal, nurses rushing, doctors shouting words like toxins, seizure, cardiac stress. Maggie sat in the waiting room, hands folded neatly on her lap. The scent of oleander still clung faintly to her skin. Hours later, a doctor approached, removing his glasses. Mrs. Duvall, he's stable for now. We're running tests. It looks like chemical poisoning. She blinked, perfectly confused. Chemical? From what? We don't know yet, the doctor said. Could be environmental. Do you keep any pesticides, solvents, anything unusual at home? She shook her head slowly. Just flowers. When they let her in to see him, Paul lay pale against the sheets, tubes in his arms. Machines beeped softly around him, steady and cruel. She took his hand. You scared me, she whispered. His voice cracked. I don't understand. It feels like I'm being hollowed out. You're just tired. He turned his head weakly. I don't deserve you. For the first time, she almost smiled. No, you don't. The curtain shifted. Luke stood there, rain still on his jacket. Oh, God, he whispered, seeing Paul's state. What happened? Paul's eyes opened halfway. Luke. Maggie stepped back, watching the way Paul's hand twitched toward him, not her. The doctors think poison, she said softly. Luke's face blanched. Poison? From what? I was hoping you could tell me. He froze, his lips parting in disbelief. You think I don't think, she cut in. I know you've both been lying. The color drained from his face. Maggie, please. I never meant for any of this. Then why are you shaking? She whispered. He had no answer. Only silence, thick and trembling. When the nurse came in, Maggie stepped aside politely. He needs rest, she said. Luke stayed behind, gripping Paul's hand, whispering apologies she didn't care to hear. She walked to the hallway window, watching rain streak the glass. In the reflection, she saw her own calm face, and behind it, the soft flicker of monitors. Under her breath, she murmured, "You killed him too." No one heard. Sheriff Clyde Thibodeau showed up 2 days later, his boots heavy on the porch. The lake glimmered behind him, sunlight cutting through the mist, like a blade. Maggie met him at the door, arms crossed, apron still on. "Clyde," she said, managing a small smile. "Didn't expect a visit." He removed his hat, eyes kind but sharp. "Heard about Paul, thought I'd check in. Man's not supposed to be fighting for his life on his birthday week." She stepped aside. "Come in. Coffee?" He nodded, glancing around the house. Everything was spotless, the counters gleaming, the air faintly sweet. "You always did keep a fine home," he said, settling into a chair. "How's he doing?" "Still weak," she replied. "The doctors think it's a poisoning, but they don't know from what." Clyde stirred his coffee slowly. "Strange thing, poison. My daddy used to say it's a coward's weapon. Takes patience and quiet hate." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then I hope they find whoever used it." He studied her face. "Funny, this all reminded me of your daddy. God rest him. You remember what they said back then?" Maggie's breath caught, just for a second. "They said he died of pneumonia." Clyde nodded slowly. "That's what the report said." "Sure, but old Doc Mercer told me he'd never seen lungs that color before. Looked almost burned." Her lips curved faintly. "Small-town stories have long legs, don't they?" He smiled, but his eyes didn't. "That they do." He sipped the coffee, then set the cup down. "Mind if I take a walk around? I've got a thing for gardens." "Of course," she said, standing. "Watch your step, the ground's soft from the rain." Clyde walked out onto the porch, scanning the row of flowers. He bent down, brushing a finger along one of the blossoms. "Oleander," he said. "Pretty, but mean as sin." "They're hardy," she replied. "Survive anything." He straightened. "You know, I once had a case up in Baton Rouge. Man dropped dead after his wife served him tea with leaves from this same plant. Took us months to figure it out." Maggie's hands stayed folded. "That's awful." "Sure was." His gaze lingered on her, long enough to make the silence hum. "Thing is, poison leaves traces no matter how clean the kitchen looks." She smiled gently. "Then I suppose they'll find them if they exist." He tipped his hat. "Suppose they will." As he left, she watched his truck vanish down the gravel road, dust rising behind it like smoke. The moment it disappeared, her smile dropped. Inside, she leaned against the counter, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from something colder. Clyde had always been clever, always too curious for his own good. Through the window, the oleander swayed gently in the wind, their petals trembling as if in laughter. Maggie whispered to herself, "You shouldn't dig where things are still alive, Sheriff." Then she reached for the kettle, calm again, letting the steam erase the sound of footsteps fading down the road. The day of the funeral dawned clear and mercilessly bright. The churchyard shimmered with heat, cicadas droning like restless prayers. Maggie wore white instead of black, a choice that made whispers ripple through the crowd. Said Paul liked her in that color. Someone murmured, "Maybe she's honoring him." She didn't hear them. Her gaze was fixed on the casket, a smooth mahogany box reflecting sunlight like polished glass. Inside it lay what was left of her husband. The preacher spoke softly, his words dissolving into the heavy air. Luke stood apart from everyone else, near the back row, sunglasses hiding his eyes. His hands trembled as he clutched the folded program, the edges damp with sweat. When Maggie finally looked his way, he froze, the air between them sharp as glass. Denise slid up beside Maggie and whispered, You sure you want to go through this alone? Maggie smiled faintly. I'm not alone. When the choir began their hymn, the notes hung fragile and mournful. She stepped forward, every eye following her. The smell of lilies filled her throat, sweet and suffocating. The preacher gestured gently. Would the widow like to say a few words? Maggie's heels clicked against the stone floor. She reached the podium, resting her fingertips on the worn wood. For a moment she said nothing. The silence stretched. Paul, she began, voice steady, was a man everyone loved. Strong, kind, always smiling. She paused, eyes lifting toward the ceiling. But sometimes love hides more than it shows. Sometimes what we think we know about someone isn't the truth at all. The crowd stirred uneasily. She smiled then, soft but cold. Still, I forgive him. Because forgiveness, he said, glancing toward Luke, sets the living free. Her gaze held his for a heartbeat too long. Luke's throat bobbed, his shoulders sank. When she stepped down, the preacher looked uncertain, but said nothing. Paul's co-workers offered her pats on the shoulder, murmuring comfort she didn't need. Outside, the sky blazed white. The coffin was lowered slowly, ropes creaking. Maggie stood at the edge, a single flower in her hand, an oleander bloom. She let it drop onto the polished wood, the petals landing perfectly in the sunbeam that pierced the clouds. Luke took one hesitant step forward. Maggie, he said softly. She turned, her expression unreadable. I don't know what to say. Then don't, she replied. His voice cracked. You know I didn't mean. Don't. He fell silent, hands shaking. She leaned close enough for only him to hear. You speak at his grave, and you'll join him sooner than you think. His face drained of color. He nodded once, stepping back into the crowd. As the final prayer ended, the wind picked up, scattering petals across the grass. The oleanders in the distance swayed gently, their perfume threading through the air. Maggie turned away before the last shovel of dirt hit the wood. Her heels sank into the soft ground, but she didn't stumble. Behind her, the echo of the priest's voice faded into the stillness. From dust to dust. The knock came 3 days after the funeral, slow, deliberate, the kind that didn't belong to strangers. Maggie opened the door to find Sheriff Thibodeau on the porch again, hat in hand, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. Behind him the lake shimmered beneath a heavy sky. Afternoon, Maggie, he said. Sorry to trouble you so soon. You're not troubling me, she replied evenly. Come in, I was just making tea. Still got a taste for that oleander honey? He asked, half smiling. Her pause lasted barely a breath. I switched back to sugar. He followed her inside, glancing around. House feels different without Paul. It's quieter, she said. That's all. He nodded, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. Toxicology reports came in this morning. She poured tea without looking at him. And? They found traces of plant alkaloids in Paul's system. Not much, just enough to kill a man slow. Maggie stirred her tea, the spoon tapping lightly against the cup. That sounds serious. Deadly serious, Clyde said. You keep any chemicals out here? Weed killer, pest stuff? Nothing stronger than dish soap. He leaned back, eyes steady on her face. Funny thing, Maggie. I walked around after the service. You got the prettiest row of oleanders I've ever seen. Brightest I've come across in this parish. They grow well here, she said calmly. It's the soil. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and set a folded paper on the table. Lab says the poison matched oleander compounds. She didn't touch it. You think I brewed it? I think you're smart enough not to leave fingerprints on a bottle, he said quietly. But smart don't mean innocent. Her voice softened. You've known me since I was a girl, Clyde. I have, he said. And I also knew your daddy. Man who died from a sickness that never quite made sense. Something flickered in her eyes, gone before it formed. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't want to believe you did it, but this county's seen enough women smile through lies to make me cautious. She stood, walking to the window. The wind moved through the trees, bending the flowers. You said yourself, poison leaves traces. Maybe those traces don't mean guilt. Maybe not, he said, standing too. But guilt's a funny thing, Maggie. It always finds its way out one way or another. She turned, her face a picture of grace and sorrow. Then I suppose I'll pray it finds the right person. He studied her for a long moment, then placed his hat back on his head. Luke's gone missing, he said finally. Left town last night. Neighbor saw him pack a bag. Maggie blinked once. Oh? Left a note at the sheriff's office. Said, I loved him. I didn't kill him. Her lips parted slightly. That's strange. Clyde's gaze lingered on her hands. Yeah, strange seems to follow you, Maggie. When he left, the screen door creaked shut. She stood alone in the kitchen, the scent of tea rising like memory. Outside, the wind brushed the oleander leaves, whispering secrets she would never confess aloud. The house had gone silent by autumn, the kind of silence that presses against the skin. Dust floated in the afternoon light, settling over Paul's empty chair, the half-read newspaper still folded on the table. Maggie moved through the rooms without hurry now, measured, deliberate as if every step were part of a ritual. That evening she pulled a small tape recorder from the drawer, an old one, Paul's, the kind he used to record notes for work. She set it on the table, pressed the red button, and waited until the soft hiss filled the room. Her voice, when it came, was steady. My name is Maggie Duvall, she began, and I suppose I should tell the truth before someone else does. She took a long breath. They think Paul was poisoned. They're right. They think I did it. They're right about that too. She paused, her eyes flicking to the window where the lake caught the fading light. But no one asks why. Everyone wants a monster, not a reason. The tape hissed softly, her words threading through it like smoke. When I found out about them, she continued, I didn't feel anger first. I felt invisible, like they'd built a world without me. Luke was my brother, Paul my husband, and somehow I was the stranger in my own home. They said they loved me in their ways. But love doesn't make liars. It unmasks them. Her hand trembled, and the chair creaked as she leaned back. So I read, and I learned, and I waited. Every night I watched him drink what he thought was care. Every morning I told myself I'd stop. But it's easier than you think to let someone die slowly when they've already killed you first. Fister? Her tone softened, almost a whisper. I don't hate them, not even Luke. I just wanted to be seen again. To make the silence look back. She stopped the tape, rewound it a few seconds, then pressed record again. Her voice lowered to a whisper. If anyone ever hears this, maybe they'll understand it wasn't vengeance. It was restoration, balance. He loved Luke, but he belonged to me. And now neither of them belonged to anyone. She switched off the recorder, staring at it as if it might speak. Outside, the wind rustled the oleander bushes, the blossoms nearly gone now, petals scattered across the steps like faded confessions. After a long moment she stood, walked to the desk, and slid the tape into a plain envelope. No return address, just one name written in careful letters, Sheriff Clyde Thibodeau. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, she drove into town and dropped it in the post box. The envelope slid through the metal slot with a soft final click. Back home, the lake shimmered quietly. Maggie sat by the window with her tea, breathing in the scent of the dying garden. Somewhere far away, a mail truck rumbled down the road, carrying her story to the man who already half knew it. Lord, she whispered, eyes closing, forgive me. He'll never love him again. The courtroom fell silent after the verdict. Maggie stood still, hands clasped, face unreadable beneath the white light. The judge's voice echoed. Guilty of second-degree murder. 30 years. No one breathed. Sheriff Thibodeau lowered his head, the tape's memory still burning in his mind. Maggie turned once toward the window. Beyond it, oleanders bloomed bright against the courthouse lawn. She smiled faintly, almost peaceful. They'll outlive us all, she whispered. As guards led her away, the crowd parted in uneasy silence. Outside, the heat shimmered, and the wind carried the faint scent of flowers through the open door, sweet, toxic, everlasting. Maggie didn't look back. She didn't have to. The poison had already done its work.